Welcome back to the Individual Psychology of Alfred Adler, the film series. In our previous section, we discussed the dynamics of neurotics and their associated ways of viewing life, which we outlined as the striving for an exaggerated goal of superiority on the socially useless side. Today we will be discussing a related topic that includes the typical forms of neurotic behaviors as a person attempts to meet these socially useless and exaggerated goals of superiority. Safeguarding, or as Adler called it, Sicherung, is more commonly known as safeguarding tendencies. As we have already mentioned, safeguarding tendencies are very often forms of neurotic behavior. The literature on safeguarding techniques is quite limited compared to other Adlerian topics, and this is partly because Adler did not formulate a comprehensive set of safeguarding tendencies. He just wrote about neurotic symptoms and included several types of movements that represent expressions of safeguarding tendencies. Within the writings that do exist, however, there's a rather large amount of agreement. As we look further into safeguarding tendencies, we will attempt to integrate these writings in a more summarized, concise manner. Safeguarding tendencies. These are cognitive and behavioral strategies, or patterns, that are used to protect an individual's self-esteem and self-worth from perceived threat. And a perceived threat is anything that an individual might perceive as beyond their capabilities. These self-deceptive evasions deter functioning in experiences and situations that evoke threat and feelings of inferiority in an individual. So anytime an individual meets a task that they feel they cannot meet, they may use a safeguarding tendency as a protective response for avoiding or justifying failure in those situations. These protective devices allow people to hide their inflated self-image and maintain their current lifestyle, which for them works quite nicely. These tendencies can also be used as excuses for avoiding everyday tasks. They can also be used to push responsibility onto others rather than onto oneself. Safeguarding tendencies are often displayed as physical or psychological symptoms which an individual will endure to maintain their self-esteem and avoid feelings of inferiority. The person is largely unaware that they are even doing this. And because these tendencies are used in both normal and pathological functioning, since everyone knows that feelings of inferiority are present in everyone. So when these feelings of inferiority become exaggerated and the individual feels overwhelmed, that they may use safeguarding tendencies rather than a more constructive approach in dealing with life tasks. According to Alfred Adler, these strategies are often employed by people who lack social interest. When an individual striving lacks social interest, safeguarding tendencies often become more evident in their maladaptive behaviors. Because these individuals have low self-esteem, all they can do is act to protect what little they have left. Some of the recent literature has even referred to safeguarding tendencies as self-handicapping, where individuals protect themselves from outside threats of life, those of failure, by changing situations or their behavior to lower the probability of success. And this refers to their perception of their own deficits. When one feels that they are worthless, more so than others, safeguarding tendencies are thus used to rid themselves of feelings of inferiority in order to protect self-esteem. By lowering the probability of success, their self-esteem may be saved. Safeguarding tendencies generally serve as a means to avoid responsibility in meeting the demands of life. The most common safeguarding tendencies are those of excuses. Excuses protect a weak but artificially inflated sense of self-worth, which then acts to deceive other people into believing that the individual is more superior than they really are. Behind these symptoms, the person then feels hidden and secure, and in that way they can find inner relief from their striving for superiority. Because they have an alibi through the use of their symptoms and the excuses, a person is able to protect their own prestige because they cannot fail in those instances. And this then allows them to continue in life with success. Because the individual has an alibi with their symptoms and excuses, they're able to protect their own prestige because in those instances, they cannot fail. This then allows them to continue throughout their lives with success, and in this way, a person is able to retain value in their own self-worth. When excuses are used, they are typically expressed in a yes but or if only format. People often explain what they would like to do, something that sounds good to everyone, and then they follow it with an excuse. Now let's take a look at a quick example of someone using excuses. So Julianne, what do you think is keeping you from getting that raise you've been looking for?
I really think that it's just, I don't feel like my husband supports me, and I think that my children are too demanding. And if I didn't have to take care of all of them, I would have more time to focus on my career.
Now, another common safeguarding tendency is that of aggression. Some use aggression to safeguard their exaggerated striving for superiority in order to protect their fragile sense of self-esteem. Aggression is a form of striving used when social interest is undeveloped in an individual. Aggression takes the form of depreciation, accusation, and self-accusation. Now let's take a look at depreciation. Depreciation is the tendency to undervalue other people's achievements and overvalue one's own. Essentially, the person is enhancing their own self-esteem by discouraging others. The intention here is to belittle another in order to place oneself in a more favorable light. This safeguarding tendency is evident in behaviors such as criticism and gossip. Let's look at an example. So what I'm hearing, Julian, is that you're feeling unsupported by both your husband and your children.
Yeah.
Are there any other reasons why you feel you haven't advanced in work as you should?
Yeah, I'm really pissed that Jill got the raise that I thought I would be getting. I feel like she does 1/10 of the work that I do in twice the amount of time. And to me, that just seems counterproductive to the entire position.
The next form of aggression is accusation, which is a tendency to blame others for one's failures and to seek revenge. Unhealthy people act to cause people around them to suffer more than they do. A person using this tendency feels deprived of their rights and blames others as being responsible for it. An individual is able to unburden themselves by blaming fate and to attribute the blame to others. When the fault belongs to others, the person is able to remain free of responsibility. Let's take a look at accusation. So you mentioned your mom a little bit ago. What does she have to do with your getting a raise?
I feel like if she had spent the money for me to go to a private school instead of going to community college and then a state school, I wouldn't be in the position I'm in now because I would already be in a more respected position than I am in now.
The third form of aggression is that of self-accusation, where people devalue themselves in order to inflict suffering on others while protecting their own magnified feelings of self-esteem. This is marked often by self-torture and guilt. Individuals will often use techniques of cursing themselves, depression, or suicide as means of hurting others close to them. So I know that you're upset about not getting that raise, but what are you going to tell your husband?
Well, I think if Danny sees that I didn't get it, he'll feel bad for me and he'll know that he needs to be more involved with the children and more supportive towards me because he knows how much this really means to me. Now that we discussed aggression, the next safeguarding tendency we're going to talk about is withdrawal. Sometimes this is referred to as the distancing complex, and this can be considered safeguarding through distance. The person puts distance between themselves, between their expected actions or decisions. Another way to think of the safeguarding tendency is that people are running away from their responsibilities. The safeguarding that involves distancing allows the person to detach themselves from life's challenges and problems. At the same time, this lack of participation enables the person to feel superior to others by remaining above or apart from the regular demands of everyday life. In the discussion of this tendency, there are 4 ways in which this can be done. Let's look at the first one. The first mode of withdrawal is moving backward, which is the tendency to safeguard one's fictional goal of superiority by reverting back to a more secure period of life. This psychological returning to an earlier phase of life that is more comfortable can be seen as a way to elicit sympathy from others. Let's look at this next example where this client returns to a strategy she used in her childhood.
I feel like you are not listening to me. It's making me really angry and I don't want to do this anymore.
Another way psychological distance can be created is by standing still. Standing still can be seen as a slightly less severe form of moving backward. People who stand still simply do not move in any direction. And by not moving, they avoid all responsibility against themselves and any threat of failure. In this way, they are able to safeguard their aspirations by never doing anything to prove that they cannot accomplish their goals. By doing nothing, their self-esteem remains intact, and they protect themselves against failure. In our next example, the client works to distance themselves from any situations where they may receive negative feedback, or in her case, rejection.
So what about your recent move has been bothering you the most?
I think it's just the fact that I feel so alone, just that I don't know anyone here, and in my mind it's just easier not to put myself out there and meet people because then I know I'm not going to get rejected.
Another form of distancing is hesitating or back and forth movement. The next form of withdrawal is hesitating or back and forth movement. Sometimes it's referred to as detouring around. When faced with problems, people tend to hesitate or vacillate, and eventually their excuses give them a "it's too late now" mentality. Rather than confronting perceived difficulties directly, the individual protects themselves from failure by focusing on diverting and on less significant functions. Individuals tend to spend a lot of time on unimportant or unrelated activities. By pursuing these other tasks, individuals then have the excuse that they have no time or energy left for the greater demands of life. Individuals are thus able to reduce their feelings of inferiority, as they no longer have to deal with potential failure that is inherent in almost all of life's tasks. It allows the individual to waste time rather than focus on life tasks.
So what's been preventing you from going out and getting a job?
My apartment has been so messy, and I feel like every time I'm about to get on my computer and start looking for jobs or start working on my cover letter, I notice that I need to sweep, and then I need to mop, and then I need to do the dishes and dust and clean the stove, and it's like I can't focus on anything else until those things are done.
Now, the last form of withdrawal is often seen as the least severe, and it is the constructing of obstacles. Some people form small obstacles in which then they are easily able to overcome. By overcoming these obstacles, they protect their self-esteem and their prestige. In the instance that they fail to overcome their obstacle, they can then resort to excuses. This works because the symptoms the person is displaying allows them to fail, or it allows them to succeed and elevate themselves, despite the limitations of their illness. Often the thought here is, if I did this when I was sick, what could I do if I wasn't? Constructing obstacles is often sometimes called the narrowing path of approach. And again, individuals often settle for less than what they are capable of and produce meager accomplishments instead. In these instances, individuals restrict themselves to doing things that ensure them success. By circumventing difficult problems in life, people are able to avoid the possibility of failure, on the other hand, to avoid the task completely and not be held accountable for that failure of that task. Let's look at an example.
Tell me about your day, Mary Bell.
Well, I know I said that I would promise to look for a job, and I did. And I know that we had agreed upon me looking for my dream job, which is architecture. But I found a job in a retail shop, and I actually got the job. And I know that's what I've always done, but I got the job. So if I can get a job doing what I've already done when I'm sick, imagine what I could do if I was actually feeling better. I could totally do architecture and build a house to live in.
Both aggression and withdrawal were the main two safeguarding tendencies that Adler talked about. There have, however, been a few others that are worth mentioning, and they are anxiety and the exclusion tendency. Anxiety was basically just described as the way of strengthening an attitude of running away from life's difficulties. This comes when change in a situation elicits fear from the person. This then causes a slowed pace where one can find pretexts and excuses to sometimes run away. The exclusion tendency really talks about how one person can narrow their view and their activity of daily life. The person is then able to exclude or shove aside all of life's problems, and then abandons himself to only his feelings, in which he can observe his own symptoms. So after experiencing a difficult situation, the person then feels too weak to deal with it, and then can just regulate those problems to the background, and in that way is able to preserve his own self-esteem.
Now that we've discussed the safeguarding tendencies found in literature, it's important to remember that safeguarding tendencies are found in everyone. It's just when they become overly rigid and persistently used that they start to cause maladaptive behaviors. Safeguarding tendencies are used to protect the person from a sense of failure and disgrace, and they're also used to eliminate feelings of inferiority while protecting or preserving one's self-esteem. They are a means of protecting an individual from perceived threat and can be used to understand patterns of maladaptive behavior. What many people fail to realize is that their self-esteem would be better safeguarded if they would just simply give up their safeguarding tendencies and develop more social interest in caring for other people. Well, that's all we have time for today. Stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about more of everybody's favorite topic, the onset of neuroses.